No, it's a shame. We just heard about it just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on...
Scientists have discovered something terrible beneath the Drake Passage's turbulent waters, something that may endanger our entire world. The results may have disastrous ramifications, and what they discovered is unbelievable. It is possible that what they found in these icy black depths is considerably more hazardous than they had anticipated. Get ready for the Gateway of Chaos, the largest ticking time bomb in the world, which may be lurking beneath. Somewhere on this planet, the waves don't only lap at the shore, they roar. A treacherous area where ships of all kinds quiver and sailors hold their breath the whole time they're there. Here we are in the Drake Passage, a very perilous body of water because to its reputation for harsh and unpredictable weather. Located halfway between Antarctica and the southernmost tip of South America, the Drake Passage links the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Nature is merciless on this battleground, which is more than simply a connector between continents. What makes the Drake Passage so dangerous isn't its location, it's what occurs there. Though at first look on a map, it would appear to be just another length of sea. The lack of landmass around Antarctica causes the winds to circle the continent with full power, bringing with them freezing storms that smash tiny ships and hurl cargo ships around like toys. Here, the waves don't just rise, they tower. Decks are coated with freezing mist, making them slippery, and waves as high as 50 feet smash into steel hulls. It is nicknamed the washing machine of the Earth by pilots and captains who have flown across it. Any respite feels like a storm's eye about to burst open. Fear of it persisted among mariners for ages. In the days before aircraft, circumnavigating South America or Antarctica required crossing the treacherous Drake Passage. These seas were the final resting place of hundreds of wooden ships. Rogue waves ripped some to shreds, while unanticipated storms engulfed others. Sailors' tales of the passage made it seem like a vicious, merciless, and ever-vigilant monster. And getting across it is still a crapshoot, even with all the gear we have now. Whiteouts, in which visibility goes to 0 in seconds, can ensnare research vessels, while icebergs float like ghosts in the mist. Wildness, nevertheless, extends under the surface as well. Underneath the waves, the Drake Passage is home to some of the world's fiercest and fastest ocean currents. Water from the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which is faster than all rivers on Earth put together, rushes through this area. One of the most unstable and unpredictable zones in the ocean is the bottom, where these undersea forces crash against each other, twist and turn. According to researchers, the local currents exert a force comparable to a fist striking the ocean, molding the weather, impacting the world's climate, and redistributing vast quantities of salt, heat, and ice. Despite this, researchers keep coming back to this spot. Why? Because solutions can be found in the Drake Passage. Grasping the process of our planet's respiration relies on it. From storms in North America to rains in Africa, every change here has an effect on the rest of the globe. It is the central nervous system of the world's oceans. However, not even scientists treat this quest lightly. Teams are prepared for emergencies. Ships are designed to withstand collisions, freezing temperatures, and capsizes. Respect the Drake, or it will remind you who's in charge. That's the silent message that starts every mission. The Drake Passage is already unnerving, and the fact that it is altering just adds to the terror. Changes in the weather are amplifying storms and raising the height of waves. More of the uncharted ocean is becoming vulnerable to the destructive power of the wind, as the ice sheets that formerly shielded ships from Antarctica disappear. More and more evidence is emerging from satellite imagery showing warmer seas moving southward and higher sea levels. The Drake is already exhibiting indications of something much larger and more hazardous occurring beneath the surface, and some experts are worried that it is getting much more unstable. Facing turmoil head-on is what it means to cross the Drake Passage. This is the last hurdle for explorers making their way to the icy poles, and it serves as a sobering reminder that the elements could care less about your supplies, your strategy, or your notoriety than they do about these things. Here, staying alive is a challenge. This is the Drake Passage, the gateway of chaos, and every roaring wave, howling wind, and rail encased in ice tells the same tale. It also retains a stony memory of everyone who dares to stand in its way. Come with me as I immerse you in the horror of this expedition, where the water held secrets no one ever intended to see. A group of specialists undertook the mission, codenamed Project Frostbite, with a primary focus: to discover what lies under the Drake Passage. Research into climate change, and more specifically the effects of the melting Antarctic ice sheets on weather patterns across the world, was the principal goal of the mission. What set this expedition unusual, though, were not the usual study goals, but rather the peculiar abnormalities picked up by satellites. Sensors had detected strange heat signatures for the last several months, and the behavior of ocean currents seemed to defy explanation. There had been a shift, and they were hell-bent on discovering it. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, an oceanographer whose job has brought her to some of the planet's most perilous locations, led the trip. And specialist in deep-sea technology named Ethan Cole, a marine biologist named Maria Hernandez, and a climatologist who specializes in ocean currents named Liam Ross, were among the scientists that accompanied her. They were all set to set off on an adventure together that would put their mettle to the test, and maybe even their survival. The Arctic Voyager, a research vessel, was built to endure the severe weather and high waves seen in the Drake Passage. Despite the ship's modern navigational aids and strengthened hull, the crew were aware they were up against an unknown enemy. There was an air of anticipation among the crew as they set sail from Ushuaia, Argentina. The water's almost supernatural churning around them persisted even before they entered the tunnel. Unusual heat spikes, huge pressure shifts down below, and patterns that didn't match any known currents in the region were the anomalies the crew had spotted on their displays. They whispered quietly about it. Still, nobody knew for sure what was wrong. As the Arctic Voyager drew closer to the Drake Passage, the sky started to become darker. As the wind increased, the waves became more turbulent. It felt different, though, so it wasn't like any storm before. Standing on deck, Dr. Jenkins anxiously watched the ominous clouds gather. The air seemed thick with something she couldn't define, which was unexpected, but she knew the journey wouldn't be easy. The initial days of the voyage were dull, with little more than the usual rough seas and constant winds, but as they continued down the tunnel, an air of strangeness settled over the area. Typical currents weren't acting normally. The ship's temperature, pressure, and salinity sensors started behaving abnormally. As if the water were concealing something from them, there were brief periods of total quiet, followed by abrupt spikes in activity on the sensors. The team persisted, intent on finishing the job despite the growing anxiety. In order to assess the state of the marine ecology and the currents, they sent out their specialized deep-sea probes to collect data from the ocean floor. Readings were uneven to begin with, but they got increasingly so with each dive. The detectors detected an unusual anomaly, a huge undersea structure that seemed to be moving, unlike any formation that had been seen before. Something old, unsettled, seemed to be hidden beneath the waves. The initial voice to express her worries was Dr. Hernandez. For all her years of research on the aquatic species in the area surrounding the tunnel, she had never encountered anything quite like this. "The water temperature is rising," she stated, her brows wrinkled as she examined the statistics. "That, however, is not to occur in this place. Under these conditions, no." After that, an even more peculiar turn of events occurred. The crew started to feel a strange vertigo as they continued to move more into the channel, as if the ship were being tugged in different directions. Unpredictable patterns emerged as the once strong currents twisted and spiraled. With each passing hour, the sense of bewilderment intensified. More and more of Ethan Cole's equipment was breaking down, he realized. It seemed as if the water were purposefully muddled the data, as the readings were becoming all mixed up. Dr. Jenkins persisted in continuing despite the mounting stress. They had gone too far to turn back now, she realized. However, there was an anomaly. As they dove farther into the ocean, it became increasingly clear that they may have entered an uncharted zone, devoid of the familiar patterns they had studied for so long. Something was changing beneath the waves that they hadn't expected. A few dared to ask if something was living under the surface, while others speculated that it may be volcanic activity or long-lost tectonic cracks. What is real? Truthfully, nobody knew. But one thing was certain. Something was stirring beneath the Drake Passage. There was tension among the Arctic Voyager crew as early as the 5th day of their journey. The waves were strong but predictable, and the storms were tolerable. Strange, repetitive pulses emerging from the water below were the signs that caught everyone off guard. Initial occurrences were more intermittent, with brief patterns and fluctuations here and there. The ship's sonar detected them as innocuous interference, maybe caused by a distant iceberg calving or undersea landslide. However, in due time, the patterns emerged, rather than being random, separate from ambient sounds. These signals were well coordinated, exact, and seemed planned. Blinking with shock, Dr. Ross gazed at the main monitor's frequency charts. "This is all very confusing," he whispered. "The source site of the signals is changing, traveling westward by several kilometers every time they repeat, which is inexplicable. The ocean floor doesn't shift in such a manner." Naturally, no. On the other hand, something just as concerning was what Dr. Hernandez was observing. The water's temperature was fluctuating dramatically, even though it ought to have remained constantly close to freezing. "We've recorded a 10-degree rise in just 3 minutes," she said, pacing the lab. "You can't call it turbulence. Even volcanic activity can't describe it. That is unique." The most trustworthy devices on board started to malfunction as well. The depth detectors gave the wrong readings. At one point, they displayed 4,000 meters of depth. At another, they sank to 1,200 meters. And finally, they jumped back. Assuming the sensors were only affected by pressure, Ethan Cole attempted recalibrating. However, alternative devices revealed the same baffling changes. They had never seen anything like the way the ground underneath them was acting. It wasn't only uneven, it seemed alive with its instability. Also, problems with communication systems began. There were intermittent outages in their satellite uplink, and data transfers were painfully sluggish. At first, the crew thought it was just atmospheric interference, but as time went on, it became obvious. This was unique, localized. Whatever was going on, it was taking place just beneath their feet. Even though he had navigated more treacherous seas before, veteran ship captain Marcus Dell felt nervous. He informed Jenkins, "The ocean feels different here." However, Jenkins never understood. In the time between storms, it's too calm. The sensation, like a fog, swept across the ship, as if something were holding its breath. Nobody on the crew was getting any rest. They kept reporting bizarre dreams. Some said they drowned, and others heard voices, night after night. Some people thought someone was looking down on them. Dreams weren't something Dr. Jenkins believed in, but she couldn't deny the sheer volume of reports and the consistent timing with which they occurred after reaching 59 degrees south. The noise then followed, very low, deep, as if Earth were to moan in protest. Just after midnight, it was picked up by the ship's hydrophones, which are underwater microphones. I didn't see a whale. There was no ice. After a little hush, it moaned again, this time more prolonged and audible, as if the metal were bending beneath the strain. It shook the laboratory to its foundations. Dr. Ross listened to the tape again and over. They hadn't studied the area completely yet, but it appeared to be emanating from an incredibly deep tunnel just beneath the ship. "Something's down there," he said, "and it's swaying." At first, the dread was kept quiet. Nobody wanted to own up to it initially. It was clear, though, that the indicators weren't coincidental. The fluctuating currents, the odd noises, the pulsating signals, and the sensor interference. Something was indicated by their gestures. A monumental event. Some kind of cleverness? Regardless, they continued forth. In order to withstand the most extreme circumstances that Earth has to offer, the Arctic Voyager was constructed. But emotionally and psychologically, they were unprepared for this. Dr. Jenkins assembled the group. What she informed them was that they had come to find out the truth. And who knows, maybe we uncovered more than we anticipated. Even she couldn't deny the weight of the increasing uncertainty weighing on her chest, like the ocean's weight, so she vowed to move cautiously, gather what she could, and maintain focus. The water below appeared darker than it ought to have been when the ship lingered above that ditch. Less warm. Calm down. Everything they believed they understood about the Drake Passage was dissolving before they had even reached the anomalies' center. Not only was the tunnel deep, but it was also broad, opening up like a fissure in the ground. As it danced to the surface, a steady flow of bubbles erupted up its sides. However, these were not just vapors. Methane was indeed verified by the onboard analyzer. Huge quantities slowly seeping out of cracks, as though the ocean floor were breathing. The rapid release of such a quantity of methane might be fatal, and its ignition or disturbance could set off environmental consequences that extend well beyond the water. "Lean in," Dr. Hernandez said. "This level of methane is unacceptable. In a different way, certainly not from this lowly place. Nevertheless, it was not all." Once the cameras got within a few feet of the trench wall, they stopped moving. There were pockets of light nestled around the rough rock. Drift off. The color blue. Still here? With great care, the robotic arm collected samples. What they saw under the microscope upon returning to the ship sent shivers down everyone's spine. Microbes unlike any other on Earth. Creatures that shouldn't have existed. Ancient, maybe prehistoric beings that thrived in frigid, high-pressure, poisonous environments were indeed present. Stunned, Dr. Ross said, "Unlike any other creatures we've investigated, these ones have been around for a long time and have peculiar chemical characteristics. In order to stay alive, they may have to digest methane, which is one of the oldest gases on Earth. This may mean that they're eating clues about Earth's past existence, or even warnings from it." Afterwards, the pressure values were shown. Shipboard sensors started beeping as the submersible slid down the ditch. Too much pressure was building up too quickly. Is there seismic activity? Most likely so. However, the pattern of the earthquake was unusual. Something about this seemed more profound, added complexity. It felt as if a huge, agitated entity was moving beneath the trench. Up and out came the methane vents. A tremendous gas explosion sent debris hurtling through the air as it erupted from the ocean floor. The underwater vehicle swayed. On board, everyone was on edge. "We need to raise it immediately," Captain Dell said. "The trench needs to be stabilized." Just in the nick of time, they rescued the submersible. What they had saw and held in their hands, however, was sufficient to cast doubt on the entire operation. Researching ocean currents was no longer the only focus. This was a more perilous matter, even more erratic. Long infamous for its surface fury, the Drake Passage was really concealing gigantic creatures beneath. An extensive network of undersea megafaults, of which the trench they had investigated was a fragment, extended for hundreds of kilometers. These fissures weren't just any old fractures. They were the traces of long-lost plate tectonics that had been dormant for eons. Worse, when ship measurements were compared with satellite data, it was found that nearby there were undersea volcanoes, some of which appeared to be active while others were extinct. After the methane jet, there were minor vibrations felt for some hours. "It's as if the whole ocean floor is shifting," said Ethan. "When one component shifts, the rest do the same." It started to sink in. These structures might cause a catastrophe if they were activated, whether by natural causes, increasing ocean temperatures, or a domino effect of gas leaks. A huge wave may race over the southern hemisphere if an eruption were to occur beneath this area even once. On the other hand, unleashing stored methane might cause seismic upheavals in the atmosphere, exacerbating the planet's already stressed climate. "Maybe this isn't simply geology," Dr. Hernandez said, echoing everyone's silent thoughts. "It may be a system, a ticking one. Plus, we happen to stumble across its countdown just now. Some have speculated that these megafaults contributed to the formation of the continents long before the arrival of humanity. Some thought there must have been a purpose for this region to have stayed unexplored. Is it possible that Earth's memory, or deep time, is attempting to tell us something? Nature, in the end, is not forgetful. All it does is wait. A short stay was inevitable, as the squad understood. Things were starting to change. Down below, the signals were becoming increasingly audible. The trench, meantime, was still talking. They buried the samples, saved the sonar data, and guided the Arctic Voyager to calmer seas, not knowing if what they had seen was the beginning or the end of their opportunity to investigate. Because there are more mysteries lurking under the Earth's surface, it contains cautions. Maybe it won't even be hushed this time. Some say it roars. What if the natural world is attempting to teach us something, rather than only warning us? Is something we've been ignoring for far too long hiding in these earthquakes, these gases, and these extinct organisms? The atmosphere had shifted by the time the ship made it back from the Drake Passage. A quest to research climate trends felt significantly more vital than it had before. In addition to demonstrating its might, the water had exhibited indications of something deeper, something linked to the planet's fundamental rhythm. Once back at the lab, the accumulated data, which included temperature changes, sonar readings, and gas levels, started to reveal a concerning picture. There was a pattern to the anomalous methane explosions, the deep trench conduct, and the erratic currents. They extended well into the frigid depths of the Southern Ocean and formed an expanding chain. The Drake Passage was behaving strangely, yet it had usually been difficult. The undersea environment appeared to be vibrating, in addition to being characterized by strong waves and frigid winds. The ice in Antarctica was gradually melting as warmer water layers began to seep into the regions where cold currents had previously prevailed. old, motionless glaciers were finally starting to recede. If they were to crumble, the world's coastal cities would be gobbled up by the swelling waters. However, ice wasn't the only culprit. The Drake Passage is directly in the path of the world's largest conveyor belt of water currents, which transport life-sustaining heat and nutrients all over the world. Alterations to the ocean's depths have the potential to slow down these currents, which might throw weather patterns into disarray. Deserts would form in some areas. A lot of people would flood. Skies may not return. Summers may be very hot. The world's food supply would run out, and environmental stability would deteriorate. When that happened, it became clear that this was about more than simply climate science. There was a resounding signal from the planet Earth. Minor tremors, unusual chemical patterns, and bizarre sensor spikes, which had previously been disregarded as background noise, were suddenly demanding attention. There was a change happening deep within. Tensions were rising. It seemed as if something under the water was gasping for air. The methane wasn't only seeping, it was escaping. Portently heavier. The unexplained creatures discovered next to the trench further shrouded the situation. They were able to survive in environments that were long considered inhospitable, such as poison, total darkness, and intense pressure. Earth may have had a purpose in keeping these mysteries hidden. Perhaps we shouldn't have poked holes that had mended millions of years ago. The Drake Passage has always been more than a perilous location for sailors. It was risky since it contains information on the seas, Earth's history, and its climate. Now it may also include the future's warning signals. No longer were the patterns coincidental. Fragments in the ice shelves seemed to be unstable on satellite pictures. Underwater, seismic maps revealed the formation of stress zones. The bizarre temperature fluctuations weren't just continuing, they were expanding. This was more than a regular occurrence. Upon awakening, I had a greater sense of purpose. You won't always hear nature yelling. As ice melts and gases rise, it occasionally makes a low, low sound. If no one pays attention to such murmurs, though, they will eventually become catastrophic events like storms, floods, and earthquakes. This is only the tip of the iceberg if what's under the Drake Passage is really, what if there's a purpose for keeping some things hidden? And what if, one day, they remember? Throughout the ages, the Drake Passage has taken more lives than only those on board ships. It has consumed whole narratives, including those of sunk ships, forgotten missions, and harrowing ordeals of survival. What lurks under the surface of the waterways is considerably darker than the sound of waves crashing upon hulls, albeit the waters themselves have always been dangerous. In the hope of finding shipwrecks from the early 1800s, explorers have spent years combing the Drake Passage's cold, merciless seas. Technology has just recently enabled better views of what lay on the ocean below, yet the treacherous voyage has claimed scores of ships. As far as the untrained eye could tell, these wrecks were nothing more than the remains of ships that perished in the face of Mother Nature's fury. Stranger and stranger things were turning up as the detectives dug farther. Ships that had been destroyed by poor weather or ill-planned routes weren't the only wrecks discovered recently. Some of them appeared to have been seized in a vice, or crushed and twisted to bits. The ships were bent beneath the tremendous strain of the ocean, as if it had encircled them. These indicators suggested the depths of nature's wrath, which was considerably worse than a storm. The discovery of a commercial ship from the 19th century that had been believed to have perished with the tides was one of the most unsettling findings. Crushing and bending of the ship's hull indicated that it had been entangled in a powerful seismic event or enormous underwater current, rather than merely a storm. It appeared as though the spacecraft had been ripped apart by forces hidden beneath the surface, since the debris was spread out across a larger region than initially believed. This was no gentle, merciless sinking. Rather, the ship plummeted violently into the depths. It wasn't a single ship either. The discovery of several wrecks with comparable damage indicators raises the possibility that the passage conceals not only ancient ships, but also the history of a catastrophic game of forces that were beyond the control of humans. Worryingly, the histories of these ships were never thoroughly documented. Unlike other well-known shipwrecks, the names of the sailors that died aboard this one were never mentioned in the same context. Lost in the tempestuous ebb and flow of history, their deaths were all but forgotten. However, the mysteries concealed within these wrecks are clamoring to be discovered. Their lives, taken by both natural disasters and human error, were an unacknowledged price to pay for crossing the Drake Passage. The fact that several of these sunken ships are located within a few hundred feet of one another adds an extra layer of horror, as if they were all dragged into the same terrible destiny. The more debris is being examined, the more evident it is that several spacecraft ran across an anomaly that altered their destiny. It wasn't simply storms that captured the ships. It appeared like the victims were trapped in an area where Earth's natural forces multiplied and trapped them. One thing is becoming abundantly evident as more and more wrecks are being pulled out of the frigid Drake route. The cost of the route has been far higher than we had anticipated, and its long-buried mysteries may be about to come to light. The tales, crews, and ships that have been dormant under the seas for ages are just now starting to rise to the surface. Maybe some mysteries are designed to remain hidden, like the mysterious forces at work beneath the ocean's surface. Because of its history of dangerous weather and rough waves, the Drake Passage is, and always has been, a dangerous place to travel. However, something more worse lurks under the surface. Recent findings by experts imply that this body of water conceals more than just natural impediments. Something may be churning deep beneath the waves, and the consequences might be disastrous. New studies reveal that the pressure under the Drake Passage is increasing rapidly. Once dismissed as innocuous, methane gas leaks are now considered indicators of more serious problems. The source of these gases, the submarine trenches, is experiencing temperature changes that no one can anticipate, and the ocean currents are acting quite erratically. The natural forces that have isolated the passage are now acting in the other direction. And that's only the start. A catastrophic collapse of the Drake Passage, brought about by mounting pressure, would set off a seismic chain reaction, releasing enormous underwater volcanic eruptions or earthquakes. Just think about the magnitude of the shock waves this may cause to travel into the sea, potentially setting off tsunamis never seen before. In a flash, whole coastal cities on every continent might be destroyed. The devastation wouldn't end there, though. The altered ocean temperatures and sea levels that followed would throw off weather patterns all throughout the world, maybe leading to climatic disasters. The fact that scientists are powerless to stop the situation makes it worse. Keeping an eye on the route is easy, but mastering the forces at work under the waves? I'll let you handle that separately. They have no choice except to wait and pray that the Drake Passage stays silent, as terrible as it sounds. The reality, though, is that things may change. What will happen if the Drake Passage suddenly becomes more stable? Might a worldwide catastrophe be igniting at the start of an abrupt energy release beneath the ocean's surface? What would happen if this time bomb goes off at last? Regarding the dangers of the Drake Passage, what are your thoughts? Leave a comment with your ideas, and if you want to see more terrifying findings, click the video on the screen.